Hey class, today we're going to talk about the Texas Constitution. Notice I have a Texas flag, and I will have this a lot in my PowerPoints to keep reminding everyone that we are just talking about Texas. Other states do things a little bit differently than we do, and I want to keep emphasizing that. Our Constitution is unlike other constitutions in that it is very, very long, very, very complicated. So let's take a look at how we got this way. In order to talk about the problem of the Texas Constitution, we have to talk about different types of law, and then we can see where this fits in. So when you think about laws, you usually think about statutory laws in that these are the statutes, the state statutes that the legislature passes. Or you might think in terms of regulatory law, like regulations that the EPA passes. Those have the weight of law. Judicial precedent has the weight of law. This is court cases, especially at the upper levels, like at the Supreme Court of Texas or the Texas Court of Appeals. But then there's also constitutional law, and that's where we run into a little bit of a problem here in Texas because we don't use the definition of constitution that is usually found, and I'm going to put it here in a little box. In other words, constitutions should spell out the powers and limitations of government. They should decide or say who makes the rules. Is it a governor? Is it a legislature? Whatever. Not what the rules are. And so what we've got in Texas is a mix of statutory law and regulatory law mixed in with our Constitution, which then gives us a very long document. Just to compare, if you'll look at this chart, our length is about 90,000 words. Actually, it's more now because we have more amendments. The U.S. Constitution only has a little over 7,000, and the average for most states is 38,000 words. So you can see we're about 3 times longer than the average state constitution. That number in the next line, 474, that's kind of a little bit out of date because we're really pushing 500 amendments now. Here's a nice little comparison chart showing that we do have a lot of the same things that are in the U.S. Constitution. And in fact, our Constitution starts off with the Bill of Rights. So it's not that it's not set up like a Constitution, it's just that it has extra stuff in it that's not in the U.S. Constitution or in most state constitutions. To give you a little overview, you can see that our Constitution in Texas does provide checks and balances. So you can see, for instance, the governor can veto bills passed by the legislature, and then if the legislature doesn't like that, they can override it. It's very similar to the U.S. Constitution. The Texas House of Representatives can impeach a governor. And there's, the back and forth, the usual back and forth. So I want you to take a minute. You can stop the video, take a minute to read this chart. It's a good, quick look at how our 3 branches work with each other, or sometimes against each other. We've had several constitutions in Texas. So the current one that we have is actually one that's come from developing many in the past. So let's take a look at what those were. Naturally, you would expect to find a constitution when we were a republic. Texas was, the first only state that was actually a country before it became a state. So that didn't last very long. By 1845, Texas was granted statehood and so had to have a state constitution. Then, of course, Texas made the mistake of leaving the Union and going into the Confederate States by seceding, and then they had to have a new constitution for that. But, you know, things didn't go well, so then they had to come back to the Union in 1866, had to have another constitution for that. By 1869, they were forced to take on a Reconstruction Constitution that Congress demanded of the southern states. And then in 1876, the current Constitution was written. This is called the Democratic Constitution, not because it was, you know, not because it's about the Democratic Party. It's just the nickname that's given to it. So what is the problem? Why do I keep hinting that there's a problem? Well, here's the problem. Texas Constitution is, as I already mentioned, one of the longest. It's too detailed. It's too long. It's inflexible. And it's very, very complex. In order to make any kind of change that normally would be handled because it would be in statutory law, and to make any kind of change in something as simple as maybe the permanent university fund that, you know, is oil money that pays for the Texas A&M and University of Texas systems, that has to be done through a constitutional amendment. It can't be done by the legislature. It's that kind of detail. Another example that I've always found amazing is that railroad pension funds are covered in the Constitution. And so anytime anybody wants to make a change in the pension fund, it has to have a constitutional amendment. It's been amended over 490 times. I would give you the exact number, but it depends on what time you're looking at it. So if it just got passed, if the amendment just got passed, it's not taken place yet, it's not counted. Once it goes into effect, then it's counted. And by the way, I did try to call the state legislature to find out how many number of amendments we had. They told me, oh, well, you should contact the state attorney general's office. They'll give you an exact number. So I called there, and I kid you not, they said, well, we can't tell you. It just depends on the time. You better call the state legislature and see what they say. So I gave up and decided it just depends on the time. Anyway, what you need to know is that we have almost 500 now. Compare that to the 27 that we have in the U.S. Constitution. There have been attempts to revise the Texas Constitution, but they have mostly met with failure. There have been some good amendments that got passed that changed some chunks here and there, but every time there has been a major attempt, it has met in failure. Now you might ask why, and probably one of the factors is the fact that the Constitution in Texas says there will be no state income tax, which is very popular, and especially popular with businesses. In fact, it makes Texas a very favorable state for business because there's no corporate income tax here. That could be one of the reasons that it gets that the revisions get fought so strongly. All right, that's enough for this. Please read your Chapter 2 for many more details, and make sure you also take the quiz for Chapter 2.